point I want to make is that despite all this stuff that's got us all in a panic, traditional capitalism increased U.S. average incomes over 2 centuries by a factor of 35. That's the trend line. So we've had, during that time, 24 financial crises, and every time we've come back to that trend line that has increased average incomes in the U.S. by a factor of 35. And one of the things that happened along that trend line was Bill Gates came along. His income increased by somewhat more than a factor of 35, if I've got the numbers right. And so the first question I have for you is, why is Bill Gates, he's the world's most successful capitalist in history, why is he so down on traditional capitalism?
Well, let me say a couple of things. First of all, I think you're overinterpreting what he says, and I think he oversaid it. And you put those two together, he does not denigrate capitalism. He knows where his own wealth came from, and he is quite aware that capitalism is what makes him able to do the wonderful things he's now doing with philanthropy. But point number 2, he's not just talking about the United States, he's talking about the entire world, Africa especially, where, I don't know what you want to date the start of the capitalist era to. You want to say 1776, when The Wealth of Nations was published and a couple other things happened. The United States has done quite well. Other places haven't. And the third point I would make is that you do have a point. I think we were just talking about this, one of the really interesting little pieces of this book is a piece by Clive Crook, formerly of The Economist, now of The Atlantic, where he points out that Bill Gates did not do what Bill Gates recommends. Bill Gates went out and operated as a traditional capitalist, and in the process, he did a world of good for many people, rich and somewhat poor, not too much for the rock-bottom poor. And then, having made this enormous fortune, he's now applying that fortune and his phenomenal intelligence to problems of the poor and netting his whole life, comparing what he did with what he says you should do. It might be you should follow his example and not what he says.